I want to just take a couple of minutes just to give a plug of one book. And stop over to the table over there, back there in the corner. We're having a Election Day sermon on November 1st, and this author will be this guest speaker as a pastor. So just stop by and see me. I'll give you a thing. As was my practice in the past to read a couple of verses from Scripture, I'm going to read something on here tonight because the topic with the kernel of chaos in the economic international markets should be enlightening, to say the least. Anyway, let me read the verses and pray quick, and we'll get into the program. When your fear, this is from Proverbs, by the way, chapter 1, verses 27, 28, and I'll read them quickly. When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind, when distress and anguish cometh upon you, then shall they call on me, meaning God. But I will not answer. That should scare everybody. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me. For that they hated knowledge, and this is the key, and did not choose the fear of the Lord. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this presentation this evening. We thank you for bringing us together. We thank you for allowing us to have this time this evening. We pray in Jesus' name. And shall we all rise for the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Randy. I'd like to ask Carol to come up and give us an update on education.
Hi, everybody. Every month when we have our classes, we learn how this government is not following our Constitution. Every month we learn something new that they're not doing that they should be doing. And in September, pay attention, this is different from usual. We will meet on Wednesday the 2nd at 6 p.m. My other two classes will be on Monday the 14th, not the 7th, the 14th. On Monday the 14th, we will have class at 3 and 6. So it's Wednesday the 2nd at 6 o'clock, Monday the 14th at 3 and 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Hello, Linda. We'd like to hear your announcements now, please.
Welcome all. I'm Linda Breckenor, membership chair. I appreciate everybody coming out on this rainy day, and I know that everybody wants the rain. All you that have gardens need the rain. And I have a small garden of tomatoes and cucumbers. Every single day we eat a tomato sandwich. They're so good, you know, when they're grown in your own garden. You know. So anyway, I want to read something here. Once upon a time, when our politicians didn't tend to apologize for our country's prior actions, here's a refresher on how some of our former patriots handled negative comments about our country. This is good. There was a conference in France where, and these are true, by the way, there was a conference in France where a number of international engineers were taking part, including French and American. During a break, one of the French engineers came back into the room saying, "Have you heard the latest dumb stunt Bush has done? He has sent an aircraft carrier to Indonesia to help the tsunami victims. What does he intend to do, bomb them?" A Boeing engineer stood up and replied quietly, "Our carriers have 3 hospitals on board that can treat several hundred people. They are nuclear powered and can supply emergency electrical power to shore facilities. They have 3 cafeterias with the capacity to feed 3,000 people 3 meals a day. They can produce several thousand gallons of fresh water from seawater each day, and they carry a half-dozen helicopters for use in transporting victims and injured to and from their flight deck. We have 11 such ships. How many does France have? You can hear a pin drop.
Now we have an announcement from... I know. I caught it.
Hi, everybody. Its heart is beating, and I don't know what to think. These are the words of Holly O'Donnell, a licensed phlebotomist whose eyewitness account is featured in the 7th shocking video released by Center for Medical Progress, exposing Planned Parenthood's bloodlust through the sale of harvested baby parts. In the video, O'Donnell admits she was shocked when her colleague used an instrument to tap the recently aborted baby to make its heart start beating. I'm looking at this fetus, and its heart is beating, and I don't know what to think. As the video explains, the technician coldly cut the freshly aborted boy from the chin to the nose in order to harvest an intact brain. This is beyond sickening. And I hope you feel the same way as I do. How many more videos is it going to take before we recoil in horror? And before we start doing something, standing up, protesting Planned Parenthood, protesting the funding of Planned Parenthood, protesting the death of these babies. It's time. It's really time. So on Saturday, from 9 to 11, in Reading, at 4th and Franklin, right in front of Planned Parenthood, we will hold a protest. We will pray, we will witness, and we hope that the people that work in that Planned Parenthood turn away and never return to that building again. And if I had a chauffeur, I'd be blowing it and walking around that place 7 times on Saturday. But believe me, I want to know the hands. Are you shocked? Are you shocked? You should be. Thank you.
Mr. Miller? The timer's on.
Let's be honest, folks. Month after month, I'm up here. I'm tired of talking, and some of you folks are probably tired of listening, but all I gotta say is when my wife engraves in that tombstone, he finally shut up, but it took an act of God. My mission is over. Okay. With all the Republicans out there chasing the Donald, and everyone from the FBI, State Department, CIA, Trey Gowdy, to Bernie Sanders, all chasing Hillary, and both sides of the aisle chasing Kerry with his Iran miracle. What's going on in Harrisburg may seem inconsequential. That is, unless you consider 2 disgraced Supreme Court justices, an indicted Attorney General, a Philadelphia congressman charged with racketeering. You can throw in the reigning mayor and the head of council. I think we're living up to our reputation of being the most corrupt state government in the nation. The good news, Representative DeWeese and Senator Fumo are about to have their terms up if they're not up already. Therefore, there'll be room at the end for new inmates. All we got to make sure is they get there. Okay. Any way you look at it, we need to continue with our mission, with those issues we champion, and try to have some impact. For those of you here last month and heard me pick apart SB 1, the pension bill, and HB 11, now called HB 466, the liquor bill, you know that I'm not a happy puppy. In fact, I'm an angry old dog. So, I won't go through all these things again, line item by line item, but I want to point out a couple of things just for refreshing memory, particularly on the pension bill, SB 1. It absolutely does nothing to take care of the $50 billion hole in the system. And I'm not saying that. Representative McGinnis is saying that. He's got a PhD in finance. I respect his opinion. It carves out the police, the firemen, and I guess all the way down to campus guards, allegedly because they have important and dangerous jobs. Well, think about this. Every one of those groups are in a union. They vote. Their unions have a lot of money to take care of politicians to get them elected. You think that's the reason they were carved out? Nah, I wouldn't think that. They carved out the judiciary. The original pension bill defined benefits. That went through the Supreme Court. They upheld it. Don't forget, the Supreme Court was covered under that pension bill. So, instead of recusing themselves, they ruled it's constitutional. I fired back Lieutenant Governor Cawley at that time, trying to point out to him that it's not constitutional. Article 2, Section 8. How many times must I say it? Salary and mileage and no other compensation, whatever. They don't get it. They got the new bill now, where it's defined contribution, except they stuck a 4% stipend into the bill, so that they'll still gonna get 4% of high tax money, in spite of the fact, Article 2, Section 8. I'm telling you folks, this is going to be a us versus them issue. That's about the size of it. They're not interested in our money. They're out to make sure that they get what they want. Okay. As I said in the Supreme Court earlier, two disgraced Supreme Court justices in the Honorable Court, one for pilfering taxpayer money for election, and the other one for distributing porn. And that's supposed to be our Honorable Court ruling on all laws passed by our legislators. It's just unthinkable. I can only say that they were carved out of this new bill so that the 401k isn't going to affect them. So, does that make it a better chance that if that bill is challenged in the court, that the Supreme Court will uphold it because they're not affected? Nah, I wouldn't think that. I don't know why I think of these things, but it's the way it is, folks. Okay. The other bill, I went through that one, the HB 466 now. That was intended to be a privatization of liquor stores. They screwed that one up. Instead of privatization, they revised the bill, they scrubbed the words privatization. Now it's a multi-tier bill where the big boys will be able to afford the max, And the mom and pops, the renters, beer distributors, they're not going to be able to afford the cost of these licenses. So who's going to get them? Those big stores that can put 30 seats in their store to hold patrons, Giants food store, things like that. Think about those big stores. They can write big checks. You don't suppose Turkside was promised checks for his war chest if they change that bill so the big boys get what they want and cut off competition? Nah, I wouldn't think that. Why should that happen? It just goes on, folks. This is just nuts. Folks, I spent 4 years in this organization, 10 years state legislative chairman of the Patriotic Order of Sons of America, 27 years vice president of the Pennsylvania Right to Work Committee. All those years, I have almost nothing to show for my efforts. These guys do what they want and get what they want, and it doesn't matter how much noise we make. It's going to take the masses to turn things around and return government back to us instead of the self-serving government they have. 4 years. 4 years. One party, Republic, controlled the House, the Senate, the governor's job. During that 4 years, think of the issues that we put on the table, and they put on the table. Property tax, right to work, pension reform, paycheck protection, liquor stores. None of that ever got past Pelagi. None of that got passed. Now what happens? Now we have a big budget problem. Now we have them trying to get through an SB1, a pension bill. Now they're trying to get through various bills, knowing full well the governor's going to veto them. Folks, we're not going to get anywhere with any kind of bills for the next 4 years. For the first 4 and the next 4, that's 8 years of my life. I don't have the kind of years some of you guys have. I'm getting tired of it. So, I look at it, there's another way to look at this. I think what we need is to change our concept from fighting to get these bills through to start looking at the politicians as the issue and not the bills. I think the issue of going after politicians might, just might, wake a few people up. We don't have to take them all out. We just have to take a few out for the right reasons. The word will get on the street. So, we're coming up with another plan, and here's where we're going to go with this. Sue Pafato. Is Sue here? Sue's in the front here. I want to remember Sue's name. She developed a spreadsheet, and in this spreadsheet we put all the politicians down in the left-hand column, and across the sheet we put all our issues. Senate Bill 76, which is property tax. SB1, pension reform. HB 11, now 466, liquor stores. The right to work bill. Paycheck protection bill. 357, the gun control bill. That's just examples of stuff. Nothing's happening with these things. And every one of those columns, we're going to have an S and a V. S, did that politician sponsor this bill? V, did he vote for it? Did he not vote for it? We're going to track these guys. We're going to have a scorecard. This is going to be microphone.
Get up to the microphone.
And when we track these guys, such as we intend to do, maybe even rate some of these. Maybe property taxes worth 30 points, liquor stores maybe only 10. But we're going to give these guys a scorecard. And when we see these guys that are flunking the test, as far as I'm concerned, they're history. So, what I would like you folks to do is... Don't ask for a show of hands, you won't get many. Okay. Here's what I need from you folks. You got a little bit of PC savvy. I want you to let Sue know that you'd like to help. We need people willing to take any of these bills and go through them, see where they started, what the bill number is, who sponsored them, how far did it get, did it ever get out of committee, did it get on the floor, did it get a vote? And we want to get this information on paper, and I want to share this with other groups of like minds throughout the state so that they know they got a problem with their representative or senator. And if we can move in this direction and get some people to help, either give your name to Sue or even give it to Linda before you leave, and we'll put a team together and see what we can do about getting some religion to some politicians. Then back off. Sort of like what Dean Klopp and his C4L group is doing. He's going after politician after politician on the property tax bill. I say, why stop there? Let's look at all the bills. And if they're not doing what we expect them to do, they need to be put on notice. That even includes, did they take the pension or didn't they? And did they vote for SB1 or didn't they? Let's get it all across the board. If they're representing themselves and not us, then I'd like them to go find another job. Okay. I thank you all folks for listening, for being Berks County Patriots, but I appreciate it.
Can you hear me okay? All right. We have been asking for volunteers and people to step up to help on the board. We are still asking for volunteers and people to step up and help on the board. Some members of this organization are going to be stepping down in December, putting lots of years in. I myself am not stepping down, but I'll be gone for 3 or 4 months come December because Deb and I decided to become snowbirds. We're not going to do the snow thing anymore. So we're going to be in Florida. So it's kind of hard to be involved when we're in Florida. So we're going to be absent those 3 or 4 months. So I know there's somebody sitting here in this room looking at me right now who could step up to the plate and fill some of these voids. So if you're interested in any way in helping in this organization, it doesn't take all your time. You might think it does. It takes some time, but it doesn't take all your time. Actually, it's quite fun. Sometimes you get in these board meetings and argue with Rod, and we give him his Miller minutes, which we give him 5, he takes 12, but it just goes that way. So, but we have fun all together. So, please see Linda Brandt, the door in the back. We really do need volunteers. Many hands make light work. I keep saying this every month, but that's the truth. Many hands make light work. If there's 5 people to do the job that 2 people are doing, well then that's more time that you get to do other things and less time you have to spend on Patriot issues. So I'm not sure what's going on with this microphone. It does seem to be acting up. So we'll have to, there it goes. All right. Do we have a spare battery back there in the box? I think we do. Can you look on me, please? So Rod, I'd like to bring you back up here to introduce our speaker, but let me check and see if I can get another battery in here first. This is my fault, folks. I came all the way up here to Leesport, Deb and I. We're right out front. We were in a hurry, switched vehicles. I completely forgot to get the microphones. I said, oh my gosh, we forgot everything. So we spun around in the rainstorm, ran all the way back down the Penn side. Only went sideways twice, it was okay. Got back up here in time and had about 10 minutes to set the microphones up. Do you have a battery? Yep. Stick it on your tongue, see if it's charged. All right, we got a good one.
Give me my talk, I'll start over. Okay. As I said, you listen to somebody that allegedly knows what he's talking about. We'll now hear from somebody that knows what he's talking about. Frank Ryan, retired Marine Colonel. In civilian life, Frank is a CPA and serves as president of his own company, which specializes in turnaround and work workout management for companies in financial trouble. He's a Pennsylvania CPA, a graduate of Mount St. Mary's College, summa cum laude, and he received his MBA from the University of Maryland. Additionally, Frank serves on numerous boards of directors, public and non-profit, charitable. Good guy. Testing, what? Wow. Okay. So, in March of 2008, he was elected president of the board of directors of the Good Shepherd Center. He's an expert in Sarbanes-Oxley and lectures on ethics and leadership. Frank was recalled to active duty out of his military retirement in December of 2004 and served with the multinational force Iraq until June of 2005. Until his initial retirement in 2002, Frank served as a Central Command Special Operations Officer during Operation Enduring Freedom and spent time in Afghanistan with the Joint Forces Special Operations Command. His personal military decorations include 3 Legions of Merit, the Bronze Star Medal, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Navy Commendation Medal, Go Navy, and the U.S. Army Commendation Medal. He's extremely proud father of 4. Fellow Patriots, I want to introduce you, my dear friend, Frank Ryan.
I was going to do this and say, by the way, I'm not going to use the microphone, but I thought he would hit me if I did that. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Hey, I wanted to start this off right now, if you don't mind. How many veterans do we have in the audience? Could I ask if you wouldn't mind standing so we can give you an appropriate round of applause? And if you're not able to stand, please sit there. God bless you for your work. For the Vietnam veterans and the Korean veterans in particular, our nation did not do right by you. And as someone who, I came in at the end of the Vietnam War and saw Afghanistan and Iraq, and I was absolutely impressed with how the nation treated us. I remember coming back from Southeast Asia, and I was not in Vietnam, but I was in Thailand in the area, and Okinawa. And they basically said, take your uniform off when you got into LAX. And so for those of you in Vietnam, Korea, World War II, God bless you. Thanks for your service. I mean, God bless you guys. Thank you. As we do this, I want to start out with the conclusion first, if you don't mind, because my wife cautioned me that it's not a good idea to have you needing Prozac by the end of the day. And what I want to tell you is this is a real easy thing for us to fix as a nation. We have the greatest opportunity to have a happy outcome that you could possibly imagine. But it's going to require each and every one of us to work together to make it happen, because we are a train wreck waiting to happen. And I'm going to give you an example, and I'm going to try not to mince words on this because I want to make sure that you have enough opportunities to ask questions. I want you to say whatever's on your mind. Let's see what we can do to resolve this. But people are fed up right now. And I'm going to give you some warning signs that I want you to be aware of that I've been telling people in the workplace, I've been telling corporations about for a while. Are you aware that worldwide we have over 20 nations that now have negative interest rates? Let me explain what that means. You lend them money, and you have to pay them to lend them the money. Does anybody appreciate how stupid that sounds? Is that very stupid? Oh no, I thought you meant I was really stupid. I've had people tell me, oh, stupid idea. I've had people tell me I'm really ugly, but I really do that, all right. You see, it was a sad thing. When I was a child, my mother used to tie a pork chop around my neck so the dog would play with me. It was horrible. But what happens is that Germany in 2015 sold 7-year bonds over 3 billion euros worth at a negative interest rate. So for 7 years, you will have to pay the German government to lend it money. And when you hear that, if you don't hear politicians saying that's scary or that ought to cause you concern, it's a problem. Today, oil prices dropped to almost $40 a barrel. The warning sign that that creates is, in case you're not aware, the last time oil did that much of a drop, it was followed within 4 months with the housing bubble bursting. This economy, no matter what anybody thinks is based upon oil and coal. And there's been an administration effort to attack the coal industry for a long time until certain members of the other side have been buying coal companies recently whose stock prices are significantly depressed. So when you start to look at these oil prices and how many places in Oklahoma, Texas, North Dakota that are laying people off, and I'm not seeing any of those numbers yet in the unemployment numbers. How many of you don't believe the unemployment numbers? Okay, so only a few of you. Yeah, well, what don't you believe about it? If you had unemployment this low, wages would be going up, and they're not. That's a warning sign. We're being lied to. And when you realize about how much we're being lied to, what you need to be cognizant of is how that's affecting you. Because what's happened for most people in the United States, their real spending income has dropped over the past 5-6 years. And what's happened is, and it almost doesn't matter who did it to you, that's going to be one of the points I'm going to make today, is both Democrats and Republicans are doing it to each other. And the people in the middle who just want to do their jobs and do well, the conservatives in particular are getting really hurt by this because we're not always being represented by people who say that they're representing us in either the state or state or federal legislature. So what happens is that when you see the unemployment rates these low, you're seeing situations now where people have had little to no pay raises for the past 5 years. How many of you are in that boat where you've had little to no pay raises for 5 years? All right? Pay cut. How many of you have had pay cuts? Okay? And think about that. And how many of you are paying more for your health insurance than you were 5 years ago? Yeah, so that's everybody. When you add those two together, the amount of money you have left over from your paycheck is down, and that makes it harder for you to survive. You know, I got to tell you something. For those that don't know me very well, I came from a really poor family. My dad, I was born in inner city Baltimore. That's why the Maryland connection. My dad died when I was 3.5 years old. My mom had 5 children to raise. She did a wonderful job. She really did. She was just a sweetheart. She was a secretary. She worked extremely hard. And for those of you that know me pretty well, I don't sleep much. A typical night's sleep for me is about 4 hours. And I've done that most of my life. Well, my mom was the same way. So I'd stay up at night, and one night I saw her and she was crying. And I said to her, you know, I was 8 years old. I said, Mom, what's wrong? She said, nothing. She said, we're okay. Well, she finally went to bed, and I looked at the area where she was working at the dining room table, and it was a notice from the bank that we were behind her on mortgage. Now, I have to tell you, don't laugh at this, the mortgage was like $37 a month. So just to put something in perspective, it was a row home in downtown in Baltimore City. And so, you know, I often wish at this time I had the income then that I did now so that I could take care of it for, but that obviously didn't happen. But, you know, I went down and I had a chance to talk to one of the banks that was there at 8 years old. And the bank president was the day when you could walk in and talk to the bank president. And so he called my mom. He said, Mom, your son's, he said, my mom's name was Valley. He said, Valley, your son's down here, and he's really trying to help you, know, and he's doing this kind of stuff. And I often tell people that's how I started my practice about helping people stay out of bankruptcy in terms of what the issues are. So about a year and a half ago, March 15, 2014, I walked across the United States. If you see me limping a little bit, that's a little bit was I had a fracture in my leg or my ankle when I was doing it. And I did it to raise awareness of the needs of children with developmental disabilities. And it was the point I was making. I said it was a walk of atonement and a walk of gratitude. And this was the point I was making. I said I wanted this walk to be dedicated to 2,806 miles. For anybody that I've hurt, I've asked them to forgive me. Any person that I've disappointed, I asked them that they would pray for me. And any person that I've helped, I asked that they would help another. And the walk of gratitude was because as I started seeing some of the children we were caring for at Good Shepherd, I realized after 63 years of age that I actually came from the wealthiest family in the United States. Our family, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that my mom loved me. And I have children that we're dealing with that have been abused, they've been abandoned, they've been trafficked. And I said to many people, I said, you know what? I never had to worry at night whether or not somebody cared. That's why I'm so optimistic about this. And here's the point that I want you to be aware of. In 148 days of walking, I did not have one bad experience. Every person I met was incredibly positive. That's why we're going to get through this disaster. And it is, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be a disaster. You saw a little bit of it today. Now, one day doesn't make a disaster. I want to be very careful about that. And my expertise in the Marine Corps is economic warfare. I've been in 6 nations in my life where the nations have collapsed. We have a very strong probability of an economic collapse worldwide. And if that happens, it will spill over to the United States. And I want to describe to you those warning signs that you should start to see. But I hope that if you disagree with me, you will at least go back and research it yourself and say, the guy's all wet, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So here's some of the warning signs. In September and October of 2015, Janet Yellen is going to attempt to raise interest rates. Interest rates right now are relatively minimal. And here's why it's a warning sign. There's this thing, it's called the ghost of 1937. And that ghost of 1937, it was when the Federal Reserve in 1937 thought we were out of the Depression, and they raised interest rates. And when they raised interest rates, what happened was it threw the United States into a severe depression. Now, I don't know how you go from a depression into a severe depression, but they're different, and it prolonged it significantly. And what got us out of the depression was World War II. And it didn't really fully recover until well after that. And a lot of the policies that took place after that became a fairly significant issue, contributing to the mess that we're in today. The second issue that you need to be aware of is if she raises interest rates and it holds and it works, in other words, she's able to raise it and it works, then everything's fine. We'll be starting to whittle our way out of this, but it's going to take about a 10-year window to get out of it. If she raises the rates and it doesn't stick, that's a major warning sign. If she can't raise her rates, that's a major warning sign. But if she raises the rates, I want you to be aware of it. Right now, in 2014, it's 2015, but in 2014, when the budget was done, we paid less in interest expense on $17.8 trillion of debt, now over $18 trillion, than we did when it was $9 trillion. That's how much interest rates have come down. So if interest rates start going up, the deficit will explode. Right now, the total federal debt in the United States is 120% of gross national product, and it's growing rapidly. Other nations, similar boat, Spain, France, Greece. So you want to be very careful. There's a perception in Washington, D.C. that that doesn't matter. These were the same people that didn't seem to think it was a bad idea that you can have a home without having an income. So keep in mind, if you think these people know what they're doing, think again, because they don't. All they're worried about is getting from one end to the other, and if they can enrich themselves in the process, they're doing it. And I know that sounds pretty sarcastic, but you can appreciate the position, I think, where we all come from. The next issue I want you to be aware of is Puerto Rico has already gone into default. But that's the tip of the iceberg, because the next city to go bankrupt is Chicago. Chicago is likely to go bankrupt probably by March of 2016. And when they do that, they do not have sufficient financial resources to pay their pensions. The unfunded liabilities are significant. And when that happens, very quickly thereafter, Illinois will go insolvent. To which the typical pundit will say, well, we'll just bail them out. There is not enough money to bail everybody out. That's the issue you need to be aware of. But I want to make it come to you. You're starting to hear it already. 5 years ago, if I had said to you on the campaign trail, if I had said to you that we need to needs test Social Security, I would have been hung, drawn, and quartered. Who just said that recently? Chris Christie just made that exact same comment. And here's the comment that I want you to be aware of. What it's basically will be sending a message is to every person here, if you've been fiscally prudent your entire life, there's no reason you can't bail somebody else out who wasn't. Now, as Christians, and those of us of faith, because maybe some of the Jewish faith or other faiths, you may say, well, we have a responsibility to help our neighbor. I absolutely believe I do. I'll be the first one to tell you, I absolutely believe I have a responsibility to help my fellow American. That's what my Christian faith tells me. But I don't believe I have a responsibility for my government to tell me that that's my responsibility. That's my responsibility, my Savior, to tell me. And when you start to realize that, the minute it becomes involuntary, it's no longer an act of giving. You will never cure a circumstance when you bail someone out constantly. The tough love concept is you've got to deal with your own problems. How many of you have ever learned a lot from your mistakes? Which is, if you've gone into Google and typed in Frank Ryan stupid, it's like 2.8 million hits, right? So I've learned a lot in a long time. It's amazing. When I was walking across the United States, I was outside of Indianapolis, and I was wearing these compression pants because they said people, and you don't know what compression pants are, they're like spandex or these black things, and what they do, they help circulation for people my age. So I was walking, and it was pretty hot out, so this Indiana State Patrolwoman stops, and she says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." By the way, I was getting a little bummed out. People keep asking me, was I okay? I kept saying, "Do I look that bad?" And a couple of people said yes, so I stopped asking that, because I just thought it was an easier way to go. So I'm walking, and she says, can I get you anything? I said, "No, ma'am." So she said, "Why are you walking?" I explained, and it went on for about 20 minutes. We started laughing. She gets back in the car, then the siren goes off. And I turned around, and I thought, well, maybe something happened. She gets out, and she said, "Sir, can I tell you what you look like?" And I said, "What do you mean, what I look like?" She said, "With those compression pants?" I said, "What?" She said, you look like a wrinkled penguin." You know, how many of you think that, hey, that's cool, what do you mean that's funny? What do you mean that? Excuse me for a second, I need to have a discussion here. Hey, did you see that? Get a visual of it. How many of you think I still look like a wrinkled penguin? Right. It is funny, yeah, but that's why I'm bringing it up. So what happens though is it's a really important issue to realize that as you start to see these defaults that are going to start happening, we have a probability of a default in Pennsylvania. If you keep looking at the way we're going with the municipal debt and the state debt, the unfunded pension liabilities, and thank God our roads and our bridges are in great shape. I'm sorry, we're in Pennsylvania. And what happens is that if you look at the amount of stuff that we've ignored because we've put it in other priorities, the amount of money that we need to do can't be taken from taxes. You won't survive. How many of you know someone who's having a tough time keeping their home as they get ready to retire? Okay, well, look at the show of hands, ladies and gentlemen. That's a problem. You know, when you get to be a senior citizen, how many of you think you have a right to be able to say, you know what, I can count on this income and these expenses, and I'm okay? So the typical response we've done in Pennsylvania is, well, let's tax the worker. Well, here's the problem with that. Pennsylvania is 50th out of 50 states now in job creation for age 21 to 31. Because we don't tax retirement income. And by the way, I made that comment once. If I'd been in a different audience, I would never say that, because if I do, someone says, "Oh, gee, I never thought about that. Let's tax that too." And so what happens is that we've dug a hole, and I don't mean we, but our legislators have dug a hole, and they don't want to solve it. As long as they can get through their process, and that's the point I really want you to be aware of, is that until the collapse happens, they don't want to work and solve it. So I'm going to give you an analogy, if you don't mind. I used to work at Wilkins. You remember Wilkins in that area when it was just a great plant, great company? And what happened is that we were a relatively small company, and then about 5 years, 6 years, 7 years after I left the company, I really just got out of school when I was working there, so I was just doing some accounting related stuff. and they decided to sell the company to Bethlehem Steel. Well, the steel industry was having problems. Anybody here in the steel industry? Steel industry was having problems back in the 60s and 70s, weren't they? We had Allegheny Ludlam went bankrupt, we had National Intergroup, we had a whole bunch of other companies. But it wasn't until Bethlehem Steel went bankrupt that the whole world went, uh-oh. Would you agree on that? And how did Bethlehem Steel end up? Gone, completely gone. And those pensioners who had a right to expect that their pensions be taken care of lost most everything. Anybody know somebody who's a Bethlehem Steel pensioner? They lost pretty much everything, didn't they, sir? Yep. And it's a major problem. So what happened was, we all of a sudden started to lose mortgage-paying jobs in Pennsylvania. Lucan Steel wanted to build a greenfield facility near Coatesville. We couldn't get EPA permits to do it. So we just sold that and said, it just won't work. We're going to create a tremendous number of jobs. A greenfield facility means you kind of start all over again. When Lucan Steel was first built, back in the 1850s and such, when Brian Williams and I built it. So we are up on current events, right? Yeah. And shortly after that, Brian Williams and I invaded Normandy together with Tom Hanks and the other guy, Steven Spielberg. So what happens is that you start to examine that stuff and you realize that we started killing manufacturing jobs in the United States. Anybody remember Dana Corporation? Yeah, good mortgage-paying jobs, right? How's it doing in the area? Gone, right? They're gone. And it doesn't, we had so many different issues in Pennsylvania where those companies are getting attacked in many ways about the ability to operate in this state. And so I'm worried that Pennsylvania may not survive if we're not careful. How many of you are close to retirement? Do you worry about being able to retire, whether or not you've got enough money to retire on? Okay, we retired and went back to work. And what happens is that people start looking at the amount of money that you would need to pay different bills that you're going to have. Healthcare costs started going up. Obviously, the property tax is going up. Your electric bill's going up. Your Comcast cable bill. Yeah, that's always going up. I kind of actually like my Comcast cable bill. I do, because each time I open the bill, I get surprised about what it's going to be. It's kind of like a little grandback. I'm just a little younger here. But anyway, so what happens is that you've got that problem in Pennsylvania. You've got other states who are running the same issue. So if Chicago goes bankrupt, major warning sign. They don't want you, it's again, a major issue. Greece. I don't know if you all heard this, but about 2.5 hours ago, the Prime Minister of Greece resigned. And so he stepped down, and what had happened was, they got their first installment of debt. He realizes he can't deliver on the campaign promises that they've done. And that's what's going to start happening. That's how we're going to start winning. Is because what happens is, I thought, my personal thing is, I thought it was going to happen when Detroit went bankrupt. Because I thought when Detroit went bankrupt, I thought that was big enough that people would go, uh-oh. But then I went back to my Lucan Steel days, and I remember National Intergroup went bankrupt, and Allegheny Ludlam, and a whole bunch went bankrupt. But it wasn't until Bethlehem Steel did that everybody, for lack of a better term, found religion. So as we started to look at this, I think the greater concern that's going to come about is the ability of these different states, different organizations to be able to pay it. Now, in the case of Greece, Greece is not big enough for people to get really worried about. And if you happen to be Greek, by the way, you don't agree with that, and I have to understand that. But if we're not careful, that starts a domino effect. Puerto Rico was first; they can't honor the obligation. And what happened was there was a problem of creation of employment in Puerto Rico, and a significant number of people from the islands moved to the United States. I mean, they are U.S. citizens, and they came to the United States. So a significant portion of people from Puerto Rico live in the United States, and the tax base is down. We're seeing the same thing in Pennsylvania. It's a bigger scale. But when Illinois goes, and then Greece, and then all of a sudden the other issues with Puerto Rico and the like, you've got major concerns. The other thing that you're going to start to see, that today the stock market dropped about 2%. In and of itself, who's going to care? Big deal. By the way, it's a big deal, but many people can say, well, that doesn't concern me. Well, here's why it should. Because your state pensions funds are underfunded already, they just became 2% more underfunded today. generally speaking. Now, they've got it invested in a whole bunch of other things, and I appreciate that. But the reality of it is that it made the problem worse. So if the stock market corrects 10 to 15%, that's going to be a major problem, and here's why. God bless you. 40% of the states right now are only funded up to the 70% level. If a corporation did that, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation would be stepping in to seize assets or force the company to start making payments. In the case of 20% of the states, right, so to put it in perspective, they are below 60% funded. So if the stock market drops 10%, and it's not a direct percentage correlation, but close enough, the stock market drops 10 to 15%, which is not a particularly big number in the grand scheme of market corrections. Those unfunded states go out of sight to the point where they can't make their pension obligations. And when that happens, then you see a cascade of different operations in doing it. The Federal Reserve balance sheet is a shambles. They have $4.5 trillion of mortgage-backed securities and other governmental securities and $245 billion of equity. They're leveraged 25 to 1. So let me put it in perspective. That would be like you putting down 3% on your home when you buy it. Do you appreciate that? Anybody who lived through the Depression? What was it like?
We weren't poor because everybody else was poor.
That's why I want that. Sir, thank you very much. I couldn't say it a better way. What you're going to see when you put all of these things together, this is where we're going to start to try to talk about some of the things that you want to do. First thing you want to do is you want to make sure you're not the poorest. Right? Because as you saw in the steel industry, what do I mean by that? If you're the first one that can't make your property tax payment, you're going to lose. Because there's not enough of you to say this is a crisis. It's when many hundreds of people find that they are losing because of property taxes. That's what you want to do as our faith-based people that we are here in Berks County and surrounding counties. What you want to do is you want to band together. So if you see a neighbor that's in risk of having to sell their home because of this, to band together with them so that united you stand and divided we fall. So that's the first item. The second thing that you want to do is keep your debt under control, and if you can get out of debt, get out of debt. In uncertain economic times, the worst thing you can have is debt. And what I'm worried about is a deflationary spiral. I was in Romania in the late 1990s for the Marine Corps, and the country went into a massive deflationary spiral. Pay dropped almost 90% in a month. Doctors were working in American hotels so that they could get tips in US dollars because that's all that had value. And it's a major concern. So try to get as much out of debt as you possibly can in the process. Live rationally in terms of what your needs and your expectations are. This is one of those few times I would suggest to you you're better off being very careful with how you spend money than going out on a limb at this point in time. If you have children or grandchildren considering going to college, look at options instead of them having going into too much debt. I used to be an adjunct faculty member at Franklin and Marshall College. I did that in 1970. I used to say 77 to 88, and somebody said 1977? No, 1877. Yeah, well, maybe I do look older than I thought. And that's funny again. Go ahead. Throw me. It's fun. But throw me under the bus. You're doing it again? This is my youngest daughter. We've been so proud of her. But what happened is she never once visited me in person. You're doing it next one. Uh-oh. That doesn't bode well for me on the witness. No, did you hear that? It's my last name, Madoff. You're too quick. How many of you think I'm going to lose this battle? Thanks for all raising your hands, but I feel so much better. Now, but what happens though, you start to examine all of these different issues about staying out of debt, things like that, and avoiding the debt for college education is because we're finding more and more students can't pay their debt back. They're getting out of college with a tremendous amount of debt in their hands, and then all of a sudden they're trying to find a way to pay this debt off. I was walking across Kansas, and I stopped in this place to get just a breakfast. There's a town of maybe 300 people, and I was talking to a young waitress that was there, And I said, you know, she was asking me what I was doing, and I told her, and I said, one of the things that I was curious about, I said, you know, what are you doing? And she said, well, I'm going for my master's degree. I said, oh, great. And I said, what are you going for your master's in? She said, music history. I said, okay. I said, what did you do your bachelor's degree in? And she looked at me and she said, you know darn well what I did it in. I did it in music history. She said I couldn't find a job. I had $60,000 in student loans, and the school suggested that I go for a master's degree so I don't have to start paying it back right away. Now I owe $80,000. And so I said, when are you going for your PhD? And she said, in about another year and a half. And I'm not putting down music history or anything like that at all, because I'm not smart enough to play an instrument or be musically talented. And so I have tremendous respect for somebody who does. But you have to look at your ability to pay that stuff off at some point in time. I would say the same thing to you about other types of debt. So you have a question?
I want you to get some water so you can keep going. I brought some water up for you.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, thank you. You're Scott. So you're a Scott and a gentleman. Yeah, so now I get electrocuted and watch what happens. So that was very kind of you. Thank you very much.
Well, the only thing I want to tell you that I disagree with you with Lukens. Lukens happens to supply all the metal, 90% of all the metal for World War II, and it started here in Reading by L'Oreal, and they become the biggest steel company in the world, and they're not here anymore.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, the L'Oreal brothers, in fact, had operations right outside the coast, so they were very closely related with the
I
families.
was down there when you were there.
Is that right? Okay, I'll say you were the smarter one than I was.
Oh, no.
But what happened is they were great companies, weren't they?
Well, it's a great company, but look at what happened.
Well, that's why I want to bring it up. Just because you make a great product doesn't mean you're going to survive. Dana Corporation, some of the Dana chassis got put on some of the same trucks. I used to make power steering gears as ours, and the Dana chassis were good gear. I mean, really a well-built piece of product. And so just because you're good doesn't mean you're going to survive. And so what happens is that this becomes a major challenge. The other thing I want you to be aware of is, as we start to look at it, the Chinese are definitely, it's called the renminbi, R-E-M-N-I-N-B-I, which is the Chinese official currency, and they are trying to replace the US dollar as the currency. Now, this is seldom when I sit back and say to defend what the Chinese said. They gave us a warning shot about 4 years ago and said, get your financial house in order, or here's what we're going to do. We didn't, and here's what they're doing. And there are a number of nations that have already started to accept the renminbi as a currency. Here's why that's important. And most of you already know why it's important, but there's another reason. Since 2014 in December, the euro has declined almost 35 to 40% compared to the dollar. All oil prices are stated in US dollars. So in reality, the Europeans have only seen about a 10 to 15% reduction in oil prices, when we saw about a 50% reduction, because their currency dropped. So you have to be very careful that a currency is only a fiat currency. It only has value based upon the full faith and credit of the US government or the government that's doing it. So there is a possibility, it's not a big possibility, but there's a possibility that people could lose faith in paper currency, particularly when there's so much of it out there. And the reason that becomes important is when your incomes drop, your ability to repay debt becomes harder. So if you've got a mortgage on your house of $50,000 as an example, and then all of a sudden, even though interest rates are real low, if your income drops, your ability to pay it drops as well. And so that's one of the other major concerns. That's why a deflationary spiral is such a major problem. And that's one of the things that we're going to try to convince you to just be very careful about. The other thing that you want to be very much concerned about is commodity prices. Steel prices are coming down, copper's coming down, all other types of commodities, not all, but most other types of commodities are coming down significantly. One thing that's not coming down are eggs, right? Eggs are going up significantly. But why is it going up? The avian flu. And so they've had to destroy a significant number of chickens in the process. So that's one of those cases where it's an aberration. But be very careful about deflation. Someone says, well, we haven't had deflation in the United States in a long time. Yeah, we have. Housing prices were deflationary spiral. And when you start to examine that issue, here's what you need to be aware of, is when property taxes go up, if incomes don't go up as well, then the value of their home using federal guidelines automatically starts coming down. And the reason being is let's use an example. If you make $800 a week, and all of a sudden the home that you want to buy, the property taxes go up, say, $5 a week. When you go to apply for a mortgage, they deduct that higher tax payment from how much you can afford for a home. And so then in order to be able to sell your home, it starts to drop. I live in Lebanon County, and that just happened in our area. We've seen home prices drop in the past 5 weeks by about 6–7%. And the reason I know that is I'm in the process of selling my home. And so it's a major problem, and you can expect that kind of thing to happen until wages start going up. And so what you should be aware of is that as you're doing these kinds of things, the best thing you can do first is obviously keep out of debt and make sure you can do that. The second thing is make sure you talk to your partner, your wife, your children, that they don't put themselves in a position where they have to do something. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. If you put yourself in a position where you have no options, you're increasing the likelihood that you're going to lose. So Rod and I were talking about it before the program this evening. There's a very wealthy investor, and he's been talking against coal for a long time. Well, then coal stock prices have been plummeting, and he's now been going out buying those coal mines. Because what happened to reserves? Because what's happening is that he's starting to see that this is a good time to buy, then all of a sudden you'll start to see that they bought them at deeply discounted prices. See, that's the thing. I'm working on an op-ed piece that'll be coming out in a couple of days, and it's about this very issue. I've seen both sides. I've been poor. I know what it's like to work hard. I told people I have a PhD, and I said, really, where'd you get that? And I said, on the Charnita Golf Course in Fairfield, Pennsylvania, and it stands for post hole digger, right? I was one as a kid, you know, I helped build the crew, and I was directed on how to do it. But we put up the fence, and the golfers didn't want you to use equipment, so you had to do it by hand. And I learned a lot by doing that. Right? And it was one, I hated golfers, but that's another matter. So I found there's a machine that you can do that. As I was walking across the United States, I got about 70 miles outside of San Diego, and this California State Patrol officer pulls me over and he said, "Sir, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm walking across the United States." And he said, "You're kind of old to be doing that, aren't you?" And I said, "Okay." Apparently I'm really ugly too, but what's your point? And it wasn't yet the time when I had the Indiana Patrol woman tell me that my spandex made me look like a wrinkled penguin. So I said, I'm walking across the United States. He gave me a great hug. He said, "Congratulations, you're almost done." I said, "Sir, I'm walking to Ocean City, Maryland." And he goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And then he said, "You look that bad this early?" So he went out and he got me some water, which I thought was nice. But as you start to look at what is happening and you recognize what we got to do to fix these things, the most important thing that we can do together, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, and I hope it doesn't sound corny to you, is this is one time I would tell you your best ally right now is God. This is the one time where I would absolutely encourage you to get down on bended knee and pray. When I was walking across the United States, I had an incident where as I was walking, I having been in the Marine Corps for a while, and the training I did to walk, I wanted to make sure I trained to get to a point where I felt I was going into heat exhaustion. Because when you feel it, then you know when you're experiencing it, so you know you're in trouble. Because from the time you go from heat exhaustion to heat stroke, it could be as quick as 10 minutes. And so you want to be real careful. And I was in the middle of the desert. I was outside of Julian, California. I was in the desert on my way to Raleigh. And keep in mind, I had left here in Pennsylvania, it was about 25 degrees. I got out there, it was 80, and within 4 days it was over 100. And so I was pretty hot. And I'm thinking, okay, this isn't good, and I had no cell phone coverage. And so I said, I prayed to bless